I didn't know a sentence could rearrange a life until he said it calmly, without heat, without apology, like he was correcting a clerical error. "I always loved her more," he said, eyes steady, voice even. "You were just a placeholder." No dramatic pause, no raised voice. Just the quiet finality of a man stating what he believed was an obvious truth. At that moment, I understood something dangerous. When betrayal is delivered without emotion, it isn't a mistake. It's a strategy. I didn't cry. I didn't interrupt him. I listened, because people reveal the most when they think the conversation is already over. "My name is Jessica Moore. I was 42 years old at the time, financially independent, socially embedded, and outwardly unshakable. I had spent 2 decades building a reputation that made people comfortable trusting me with budgets, timelines, and outcomes. I was the woman who organised the neighbourhood fundraisers, who sat on the board of a regional non-profit, who showed up early and left last. I lived in a quiet, manicured suburb where reputation mattered more than truth, and where engagement announcements travelled faster than ambulances. I wasn't flashy, but I was solid. And solid women are often chosen not for love, but for stability. The day he said it, nothing about our house suggested it would become a crime scene of memory. The kitchen was clean, the counters bare except for a wedding planner binder and 2 coffee mugs cooling untouched. He stood near the island, hands resting flat, like a man delivering a quarterly report. He explained himself the way executives explain layoffs: necessary, regrettable, already decided. He said he cared about me, respected me. Jan admired what we had built. Then he said the part that mattered. She had always been the one, but timing had failed them. I was what made sense when she didn't. I asked one question, carefully chosen, the way you choose words when negotiating a contract you already know is void. "And now?" He exhaled. A small sound of relief, as if grateful I wasn't making this difficult. He said he needed honesty before marriage, that he couldn't start a life with a lie. He said the ex was in his past, but his eyes flicked to the counter when he said it. Not to me, to the counter. People look toward exits when they're lying, but they look toward objects when the lie is already in motion. I told him I appreciated his honesty. That part was true. I told him I needed time to process. That part was strategic. He nodded, visibly relaxed. And reached for his phone when it buzzed. He checked it, turned the screen face down, and slipped it into his pocket too quickly. That movement, the speed, the angle, the assumption that I wouldn't notice, was the first real clue. Not because of jealousy, but because of confidence. He believed the conversation had ended with him in control. Men who think they've won stop guarding the doors. After he left for his late meeting, I didn't move. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the wedding binder, not because I needed it, but because habits are grounding when your internal math changes. Guest lists, seating charts, catering deposits. Our lives had been reduced to line items. I noticed how many decisions I had made alone, how often he had deferred. I wasn't his partner, I was his infrastructure. The realization didn't hurt, it clarified. And clarity is always more useful than pain. That night, I replayed the conversation not for emotion but for structure. What he had said, what he had avoided, where his language softened and where it hardened. He had framed the ex as history, but he spoke about her in the present tense. He had described me as reliable, not loved. And most telling of all, he had assumed I would absorb the truth quietly and continue forward, grateful for the honesty. That assumption told me exactly how he saw me. Not as a woman who might react, but as a system that would adjust. I slept normally. That surprises people when I tell them later. I didn't toss or spiral. I slept because I had already made a decision. I would not confront him again without proof. Accusations invite denial, and denial buys time. I didn't want time for him. I wanted information for myself. In the morning, I followed our routine. Coffee, news, a brief exchange about schedules. He kissed my cheek, a gesture that felt procedural now, and left his tablet charging on the kitchen counter. He always forgot it. That wasn't new. What was new was my understanding of why. The tablet was synced to his phone, our shared cloud account, our shared life. We had set it up that way years ago for convenience. Calendars, travel confirmations, shared documents. Transparency, we had called it. I picked it up without hesitation, not because I was snooping, but because I was auditing. There's a difference. Audits aren't emotional. They're methodical. I didn't open messages right away. I checked the calendar first, then email, then travel apps. Everything looked clean at a glance, which told me someone had curated it. I was about to put it down when the screen lit up on its own. A notification banner slid across the top, brief and unguarded. A name I hadn't heard spoken in years but had just been given new weight. Her name. No message content visible yet, just the sender and the timestamp marked as now. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. What I felt was alignment, the click of a puzzle piece finally seated correctly. He hadn't ended anything. He had been managing it. The banner faded, but the damage was done. I tapped the screen, not to read, yet, but to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't about jealousy or heartbreak. This was about logistics, leverage, and lies layered carefully over time. I set the tablet back on the counter exactly where it had been, plugged in, innocent-looking. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee and stood there, watching the steam rise, understanding that the sentence he had offered as closure was actually an opening. Because the truth is, when a man tells you you were a placeholder, he isn't confessing love, he's revealing carelessness, and carelessness always leaves a trail. That night, when the house was quiet and the tablet lit up again, I finally looked down and saw her name waiting for me on the screen. By the time I understood the scope of it, the emotional part was no longer available to me. That reservation, made under my future last name before the proposal, wasn't a mistake. It was a rehearsal. People don't accidentally practice a lie months in advance unless they expect to need it. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't even close the tablet right away. I stared at the screen and let the implications settle into place because once you see intent, you can't unsee it. He hadn't proposed out of love or timing. He had proposed to legitimize a structure that was already operating. The next step wasn't more digging, it was interpretation. Raw evidence tells you what happened. Interpretation tells you why. I printed nothing. I forwarded nothing. I sat at my desk and began mapping the messages by tone instead of content. When she spoke to him, the language was romantic but deferential. When she spoke to the other family member, it was grateful but urgent. Two different emotional keys unlocking two different doors. She never asked directly for money. She spoke about instability, unfairness, and feeling overlooked. Men like them don't need to be asked. They need to be positioned. I replayed a dinner from months earlier, a casual comment she'd made when she was mentioned in passing. "She's had such a hard time," he'd said, shaking his head. I remembered nodding, sympathetic, distracted by seating charts. That sentence wasn't concerning. It was justification. He had already decided what he was entitled to do. The money wasn't secret because it was shameful. It was secret because it was strategic. And strategy doesn't tolerate witnesses. I requested one more meeting with the family attorney, this time in person, this time without pretense. I didn't bring documents yet. I brought questions shaped like hypotheticals, but weighted with reality. If a person outside the family is receiving regular financial support from multiple members, I asked, and referencing estate outcomes in private communication, how is that categorized? He didn't answer immediately. He asked who I was asking for. I told him I was asking for myself. That was the moment the room shifted. He leaned back, folded his hands, and asked me what I knew. I told him only what I could prove. I spoke in dates, amounts, message patterns. I didn't speculate the motive. I didn't accuse the character. I let the structure speak for itself. When I finished, he didn't ask to see the evidence. He asked how long I had known. Long enough, I said. That was enough for him. What he explained next wasn't dramatic, but it was devastating in its calm. If the marriage proceeded, my fiancé would gain a legal position that made the financial transfers harder to challenge. Trust language could be interpreted differently. Influence could be normalized. In short, the scheme would become defensible. The ex didn't need to marry into the family. She needed someone else to. Someone stable, someone credible, someone like me. I went home that night and watched him move through the house with casual familiarity, unaware that his leverage had evaporated. He talked about a family dinner scheduled for the following week, pre-wedding, celebratory, symbolic. It'll be good for everyone to feel aligned, he said. I agreed, because alignment was exactly what I wanted too. He kissed my forehead, checked his phone, and went to bed early. I stayed up, assembling the evidence into a sealed packet labelled only with the attorney's name. I didn't sleep much, but not because I was anxious. I was recalibrating. The confrontation wouldn't be personal. It would be procedural. Families like his didn't respond to emotion. They responded to liability. I wasn't going to expose him as a man who lied. I was going to expose him as a risk. And risks get removed quietly, efficiently, without sentiment. The day of the dinner arrived without incident. I dressed carefully, not provocatively, not defensively. Neutral colours, familiar silhouette. I wanted nothing about my appearance to distract from what would happen. He commented that I looked calm. I am, I said, and meant it. Calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's the presence of control. Before we left, my phone buzzed. A message from her accidentally routed to the shared cloud. Just 2 words. Tonight matters. I didn't respond. I powered the phone down and placed it in my bag next to the sealed packet. The timing confirmed everything. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know where. At the restaurant, the family gathered as they always did. Polite, polished, rehearsed. Toasts were made. Laughter landed on cue. My fiancé held my hand under the table, confident, oblivious. When dessert menus arrived, I excused myself briefly and handed the packet to the attorney, who had arrived quietly and taken a seat at the far end. He looked at me once, searching my face for hesitation. There was none. He asked one question, low enough that no one else heard it, but clear enough that it landed exactly where it needed to. Do you want this handled privately? He said, or correctly? No one ever believes the end of a life-altering story will sound like cutlery against porcelain, but that's exactly how it began. The attorney didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply placed the packet on the table between the breadbasket and the wine glasses, like an overdue bill finally delivered to the correct address. Conversation tapered off, not because anyone sensed drama, but because authority had entered the room. Families like this were trained to recognize that moment, the shift from celebration to consequence. He didn't start with accusations. He started with structure. He referenced dates, not people, transactions, not intentions. He explained in a tone normally reserved for estate briefings that certain financial activities had come to light that required immediate clarification before any marriage proceeded. The word marriage landed hard, like a gavel strike. My fiancé's hand tightened around mine, not in comfort, but in instinctive control. He was still trying to manage optics. That was the last useful thing he would do. The attorney slid the first document forward, a summary of transfers. Another followed, message excerpts, redacted just enough to be legally appropriate, but not enough to soften impact. No theatrics, no moral language, just facts arranged in a way that made denial inefficient. Someone asked what this meant. The attorney answered without looking at them. It means the wedding is cancelled, effective immediately, pending review. Silence followed. Not shocked silence, but recalculating silence. The kind where people quietly assess their own exposure. My fiancé finally spoke, voice tight, controlled. He said there had to be some misunderstanding. He said everything he did was out of loyalty. He said he was trying to help someone vulnerable. The attorney nodded once, acknowledging the argument without granting it weight. Then he read aloud a message where inheritance outcomes were referenced casually, optimistically, as if already secured. The room didn't gasp, it froze. Vulnerable people don't plan estates. Opportunists do. The older family member, the other man, went pale. Recognition hit him before explanation did. He understood before anyone said his name. That was the moment the scheme collapsed inward. Not because of me, but because manipulation relies on isolation, and isolation had just been broken. The attorney closed the folder and stated the next steps as if outlining a meeting agenda. Immediate restructuring of trusts, suspension of discretionary access, formal documentation of disinheritance pending further review. Disinheritance isn't announced emotionally. It's recorded. He explained that paperwork would be filed within the hour, that letters would follow, that access would be revoked, not debated. My fiancé stood abruptly then, chair scraping, and demanded to know how this was happening. The attorney finally looked directly at him. "Because you made yourself a liability," he said. "Not immoral, not cruel, a liability." That word did more damage than any insult could have. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My role had already ended. I had delivered information to the only system that mattered in that room. When my fiancé turned to me, eyes wide, searching for betrayal, I met his gaze evenly. There was nothing left to negotiate. He said my name once, sharply, like a summons. I stood, picked up my bag, and thanked his parents for dinner. Politeness confuses people at moments like that. It reinforces finality. As I walked out, the attorney was already dictating next steps into his phone. The family didn't follow me. They were busy reordering their future. Outside, the night air was cool, ordinary, unchanged. That's the part no one prepares you for, that the world doesn't react when your private life detonates. I sat in my car for a moment, not to cry, but to breathe. Control doesn't mean absence of feeling. It means choosing where feeling belongs. The next day, the announcements went out. Not gossip. Statements. The wedding was cancelled due to unforeseen legal matters. No names, no explanations. Inheritances were amended quietly. Accounts frozen. Access revoked. My fiancé received his disownment in writing, the way families like his end things. Formally, irreversibly. He tried to call. I didn't answer. He tried to explain. I didn't listen. Explanation is for people who still have leverage. Weeks later, I packed the house efficiently. I took what was mine and left what wasn't. There was no dramatic exit, no last conversation. He had said everything he needed to say when he called me a placeholder. He just hadn't understood what that made him. Placeholders get replaced, systems get audited, and schemes, no matter how carefully managed, always collapse under their own paperwork. I moved on quietly, reputation intact. Finances clean, lessons learned without spectacle. And when people ask me now how I stayed so calm, I tell them the truth. I wasn't calm because I was strong. I was calm because I paid attention early. And attention, when paired with restraint, is the most unforgiving form of power there is. If you stayed to the end, you already know this wasn't just a story. It was a warning. If you've ever trusted someone too quietly, if you've ever been chosen for your stability, not your love, if you believe truth backed by receipts always wins, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell for a daily dose of revenge served on a plate. These stories are for adults who understand that betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs paperwork and smiles at dinner. New stories drop daily. No drama, no filler. Just quiet power, real consequences, and endings that stay with you. Subscribe, because paying attention changes everything.